in the manifestation space, the wizard Liz got cheated on by her fiance Landon, and even though this is not necessarily the most wonderful thing, it's awful, terrible that it happened. It holds up a mirror for hyper independent and successful women to understand why this happens and how to prevent it from happening to you. Because when you're in the manifestation field, and especially since you're somebody who knows how to manifest really well, and what I've noticed with highly successful women, all of them are very great at manifestation, whether they consciously know that they're doing it or not. If you do not, if you don't address healing that you need to go through in your life, you're going to end up attracting lessons to yourself that force you to deal with those problems. Um, and it's sad that this happens to a woman who, is pregnant and has to go through this whole experience publicly in front of people. It's not a fun thing. It's not a fun experience. So for so for us, we can use this as an opportunity to use her experience as a mirror to help us fully understand why is something like this happening. What is the archetype behind it? Because I know a lot of really successful women who may be watching any of these videos may be scared and fearful about having this stuff happen to them as well. So how do we actually go through the process of preventing something like this from happening by deleting the loop ultimately? Because these are there are manifestation mechanisms that are in place that cause this to happen related to the subconscious mind, ancestral stuff, collective intelligence, and like the occult. And if these things are addressed, we can actually end up healing and prevent you from having to go through a similar experience. So why does partner betrayal get manifested? Well, if you have been somebody who's studied the Wizard Liz, which you may have if you're watching this video, um, it's not surprising that something like this would happen. She fits the archetype because she, in early childhood, experienced infidelity and abuse in the relationship between her parents, her mom and her dad. So her father, she'd spoken about this in several interviews and other videos, that her father had cheated on her mom and physically abused her mom and her sister, and it was an awful, terrible thing that she went through, and it became a core wound of her childhood. And after her father had left, um, ultimately she had to end up stepping up and becoming the provider for her family, providing and assuming that role after her dad was gone. Now, it's funny to hear people in the manifestation space kind of like shoo the past aside like it doesn't matter, but that's not the case. When we're talking about any of this, when we talk about manifesting, we're always constantly manifesting everything that's happening around us. And our subconscious is built up of what happened to us when we were children and in our childhood. And if you have those kinds of traumatic experiences, they end up shaping your subconscious beliefs. So in her instance, the subconscious beliefs that she had were around men. So like men equaling betrayal, men being evil, or men men you can't rely on men. I have to be the person who chases the bag and gets the bag myself because people can't be men, or people can't be trusted. And when those kinds of thoughts roll around your head again and again, it ends up manifesting, of course, number one, in your behavior, number two, in your language, and number three, the situations that come into your life because of how you like organize your life. So for her, the way that this manifested in her behavior ended up becoming like her hyper independence, which typically happens with people who go through traumatic experiences because ultimately they develop fearful avoidant attachment styles, which is also known as like a disorganized attachment style. And the people who have fearful avoidant attachment styles will sometimes seem really successful. They're hyper independent. They do not need other people. And they may have a lot of things put together in their life, and you may think that these people are amazing and well put together until you start looking at them more closely, and then you realize how they navigate their personal how they navigate their personal close intimate relationships shows that there's something wrong ultimately. um so for her, that that subconscious pattern ended up playing out as her becoming this provider for her and her family, and ultimately using money as a substitute for safety in a relationship, where she was amplifying that masculine energy of I have to do everything myself. And you can see this playing out in her content because she's so hyper focused on being either taken care of or having money herself, for not only for herself but also for her followers as well. And that level of hyper independence isn't always healthy. That's a nice way of putting it. It isn't always healthy, and that 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 hyper independence ends up that hyper independence ends up setting up a relationship dynamic where it's likely that the other person, especially if it's a man, we're talking about what happens and like why hyper successful women end up getting cheated on. If a woman is in a space where she is hyper independent and doesn't require another person in her life, the people that they end up, oh, I'm from the U.S. I'm American, but I'm a lot of things. I'm a mutt. Um, anyway, where was I? Uh, experiencing early betrayal, going into boss mode, survival mode, ends up setting up a relationship dynamic that isn't a healthy one. And that's why it's so important to deal with early trauma and early betrayal, because if that stuff isn't like addressed, you're going to subconsciously repeat the pattern and bring someone into your life that forces you to learn that lesson and deal with it. Um, and the funny thing is, we're watching this unfold in real time, where she, of course, has been very public about talking about avoiding low value men and telling her followers to avoid cheaters, and that kind of red flag gospel ends up putting out a lot of energy, where you will typically end up attracting what you put a lot of attention into. And by putting a lot of attention into that, and her videos got a lot of attention, millions and millions of views, you're going to end up creating um, an energized thought form where that kind of stuff is likely to happen in your experience again, because you're usually going to just ignore red flags and problems like that. And ultimately, this ended up showing up in her experience as this betrayal in adulthood, which confirms that subconscious script, that self-talk that she's been repeating again and again, which is like, oh, see, men always leave, see, men are terrible, men are awful, men make you feel like humiliate you. It's confirmation of the same story that she's been telling herself again and again. So there are a couple of different places that this stuff ends up manifesting from in our experiences for both women and for men. Number one is the personal subconscious programming that comes from like early programming in our lives. So for her, it was the early imprint of the infidelity with her father and the abuse, which ends up signaling to the nervous system that love or men equal danger, problematic. And that ends up manifesting to protect from danger. The self-talk ends up becoming that, like, hey, you shouldn't rely on anybody, don't rely on anybody. You become hyper vigilant, and that hyper vigilance is paired with the body staying in a constant state or of flight or flight, which ends up meaning that they can't relax, they can't stay calm, and to the outside world, that may not like read very well, because to the outside world, this person may be very successful, but that's because they're constantly making sure that they have more than enough, or that they work extra hard so that they don't have to rely on anybody else because they don't want to feel as though that they're out, like they're powerless. So in those relationships, they'll end up making their partners end up feeling expendable. Pair that together with like the obsession of red flag content where you're like, hey, avoid these kinds of guys, avoid these kinds of things, that starts putting those images into the subconscious mind. You also talk about, let's say, like subconscious programming with like a lot of content that's been put out related to cheating, like Temptation Island or any other stuff like that. That ends up laying inside of there. So your whatever you put your attention on ends up becoming like a prayer, and it feeds that storyline of things that you've believed in the past. And when your body broadcasts a specific state and you continue saying a certain story, the the only thing that the 3D can obey is like that you expect things to go that way. So if you consistently tell yourself you can't rely on anybody, I can't rely on anybody. No, I can't rely on anybody. I have to secure the bag myself. I can't rely on anybody. I can't rely on anybody. I can't rely on anybody. If you continue to repeat that story again and again, the only thing that can happen is that your 3D can only bring you people that prove to you that you can't rely on anybody. So that's like mental personal programming that comes from the early stages. After we go into that, that's when we move into the next layer, which is like epigenetics and ancestral. Because number one, it comes from personal experience and what happens to the subconscious mind while you are a conscious being, or between the ages of 0 and 7. Then there's also the epigenetics and the ancestral layer, because a lot of these things that's like left out of the conversation related to manifestation is how does the experiences of our mother and our father and their mothers and fathers, how does that end up affecting us? Science calls it epigenetics, but occultists and people who study the metaphysics will usually refer to it as the egregore or the family egregore. And egregores are essentially um, thought forms that build with a group. It's like a collective unconscious of a group. And if you're part of a family, that group shares what is known as an egregore. But for the sake of more scientific people, we'll use terms like epigenetics. And essentially, when there is trauma that is tagged in the DNA and passed on between generations. And that's why if you look at stories between generations, you'll notice that they'll have similar themes. If somebody's grandparents had experienced betrayal in their relationships, their kids are probably going to experience betrayal in their relationships. And their kids are probably going to experience betrayal in their relationships. It's a common theme that continues again and again. And people will refer to this as like generational curses and things like that. So for the Wizard Liz, or for other hyper independent women, this will usually come across as like men stray, men are awful and terrible, but we still survive. And unless this stuff is consciously cleared, the body keeps the score and it's going to replay again. The egregore is going to want to continue the pattern until there is some form of resolution, until somebody is strong enough to break that generational curse or break that pattern so that the next generation doesn't continue doing the same thing or doesn't continue experiencing the same kind of problem. And it's not an easy thing, to be 100% honest. It's really not. But it's important to keep that in mind, because if you understand, hey, if I personally know that my parents or grandparents went through a like betrayal or infidelity, there's a high likelihood that I'm going to experience something similar. We talk about it when it relates to stuff like freaking health issues, but people kind of like leave it out of the conversation when we talk about like family trauma and different sort of like relationship patterns that play out. It happens all the time. It's one of those layers. You need to keep it in mind, especially if you're trying to have and attract your ideal relationship. Because if you haven't addressed it consciously and processed it, you're going to end up repeating the pattern more than likely. So it needs to be addressed and taken care of. The third layer that creates these kinds of experiences is like the collective archetypes, which is really interesting to see reflected in the Wizard Liz, and especially is interesting for other hyper successful women because there is like this collective archetype of the betrayed lover, of the betrayed lover, especially for like this successful woman, like this pop culture visual or concept or symbol of this strong boss babe that gets cheated on. It's a storyline that gets played again and again and again, and it's very interesting for women who are excuse me, who are very public figures. If they are not aware of what archetype or what character they're playing, well, I'm not surprised that it's your biggest fear. So thank you for sticking around and watching, because we're going to talk about like how to actually clear the fear out of you. Um, if you're somebody who's hyper successful and you're in the public eye, you're no longer just an individual. You will be consumed like a character. You hit some sort of archetype, and because you hit some sort of archetype, people are going to be waiting for your story to go along the lines of whatever archetype that you're playing. Because every single celebrity that we're watching these. They're essentially. It's really interesting to watch celebrities because they're essentially like live gods and demigods from like Greek and Roman times. We're watching like these Greek and Roman tragedies of these huge figures, and we understand and know the stories. So we wait for them to unfold. And if you're a woman who's hyper successful or a man who's hyper successful, understand that you are not just an individual living your life. You're the main character of a story. And if you're a successful person, especially as someone in the content creation or entertainment space, you're not just an individual, you're a character in the news stories that come out. So I'm talking about the Wizard Liz. I'm not the only person who's talking about her. So her having this happen plays into this collective unconscious fear of this archetype. So that's why you have all these videos of these women who are like, men ain't shit, they're awful. Oh my gosh, if she gets cheated on, then we have no hope for ourselves, which is playing into that collective archetype, which is part of like an egregore. So the egregore gets fed and continues the process again, because if women end up fearing that and see these public figures, then the subconscious pattern becomes stronger and gets to play itself out again and again and again and again and again. Young Carl Jung would call this the betrayed lover archetype, which is one thing to think about. Like how am I playing into like the collective frequency of the collective unconscious. How am I playing into the collective unconscious of everyone who's consuming my content with the character that I am portraying? And then, of course, the fourth layer happens to be like the occult mechanics that this stuff puts together. As somebody who is a manifester, you're tapping into energy systems that exist, and because of that, they're different mechanisms that are used that create the experience of what's going on. So like egregores, the thought form, this entity that just continues to want to exist, so it'll continue to appear in people's lives. It'll continue to show stories so that people continue to think about it and continue to cause it to extend its existence. Because egregores, the way that you kill or rid yourself of egregores is that you starve them. You stop focusing on them and then they die. But they don't want to die. They want to continue to exist. So they will continue to perpetuate stories so that people continue to fear these things. So the occult mechanisms that cause this stuff to happen is like, oh, the egregore that all men cheat, and this is where you see viral red flag videos that go viral all the time. You have the psychic cords of past betrayals that you may be experiencing and dealing with. So if you don't cut psychic cords to past experiences and past traumas, that stuff is going to continue to play out inside of your life. Then you have the shadow projections of like craving freedom, which ends up causing which ends up causing somebody to attract a partner that will play out like suppressed desires. And the other occult mechanism is an energy thing where if you become hyper masculinized and you polarize yourself to the hyper masculine, it starves the receptive feminine channel, which stops women from receiving or sensing misalignment early on. So you want to make sure that you're not super polarized so that you can actually pick up on signals that let you know, like, hey, this person may not be the right fit for you, which is really interesting because people who have like really studied and watched Wizard Liz, they've noticed that it's gonna sound bad, it's gonna sound terrible when I say it, but she did this to herself because before this relationship, she left a stable, comfortable relationship. Her relationship before this was a stable and comfortable relationship, and she left it because she was bored of being in a stable and comfortable relationship. And she got herself into a relationship which was like problematic from the very beginning. Like her red flag signal should have been going on, and she should have said she could, if she was in the right receptive feminine state, she would have noticed the red flags early on with stuff like the love bombing, where he was doing stuff like he was invited on a girls trip and told her that he loved her within 36 hours of them being together, which is insane, or sending her over 700 flowers to her house. um, I wouldn't say that the $100,000 ring was a really big red flag. Could have been, or it could have been the fact that they got married within a very short period of time. This relationship has only been going on for about like 7 months. So getting pregnant very quickly with a long distance relationship is like wild and outlandish to have something like that happen within a very short period of time. But if you're not receptive, you're probably not going to be picking up on, well, not picking up. She may have picked up on it, but making sure that you're going with your gut and your intuition is a very uh, feminine energy thing. And if you're not tapping into or properly balancing both elements of your energy, you may not pick up on things that you need to notice. Like, why is this person sending me 700 flowers? Yeah, it seems cute, but it's like that's a little excessive. Is this person okay? Obsession is not the goal. Obsession is most definitely not the goal when it comes to relationships. And so for my hyper independent girlies, these are the reasons like why you do not want to be you don't want to be hyper independent. You do want to be independent, you don't want to be hyper independent. Here's the reason why. If you're hyper independent, you magnetize yourself to betrayal. And the hyper independent reflex, understand like why that happens, especially with early trauma. But when you say something like, and you don't have to say this verbally, it may not be a thought inside of your head, you may say this with like your energy because you don't feel comfortable with giving anybody else power or asking for help from anybody else. If your hyper independent reflex is I don't need anyone, the energetic consequence of that feeling of that subconscious belief is that you close the receiving channel. If you don't need anyone, you can't receive anything from anyone else. And in a partnership and in a relationship, that leaves the partnership feeling one-sided and or performative. Like, oh yeah, we're just here, we're just going through the motions. And the result, which will typically happen from that, is that a partner rebels or seeks validation elsewhere because they're not receiving that kind of validation from being needed by their partner. Nobody wants to be with somebody that they feel as though doesn't need them at all. They want to feel validated. They want to feel as though that their contribution means something. And if you don't feel as though that you need anybody, you ain't gonna have anybody to need. And being hyper independent in some cases with certain women, that might lead to consuming certain kinds of content or talking about certain kinds of content, especially when it's like red flag related content, like, hey, red flag on this guy, red flag on this. The energetic consequence of like constantly auditing red flags of people in both content in your own life is that you end up turning that thing you focus on into a prayer, because you become what you think about most of the time and you attract what you think about most of the time. So if you're constantly focusing on and vetting for negative things like red flags, you end up inviting it into your life because it's something that's constantly playing out in your thoughts, and everyone is you pushed out. And if you're focusing on this stuff, the only thing that you can attract to yourself is more of that thing. So that ends up that the 3D consequence of that kind of stuff is that you end up attracting men who hide their flaws and hide these problems until there is some form of commitment. And then they end up sharing all those flaws and all those problems. Um, which is why it's important to be very intuitive and in tune with your energy to figure out, like, is this person actually here for me? Do they have good intent? Because they may seem as though that they have good intent, but that might not necessarily be the case. And then we have the third hyper independent reflex, which is like idolizing provider men to offset childhood scarcity. So the women who I've known who are hyper independent will typically like idolize and want those like provider 6 7 figure men, but that's usually a reflection of trying to heal like this child wound, this lack. Like, I want you to give me everything. I want someone who's able to give me everything that I've ever wanted, because I know in my childhood I went without. I lacked. I didn't get everything I wanted. So I want to be spoiled. And the problem with that is that that mindset energetically ends up putting money and power on a pedestal. And in the Wizard Liz's case, that pedestal cast the shadow of her father, like that father wound. That was what ended up playing out again. And for her, like that result ended up creating like the 3D result of having a wealthy partner, because that's the thing that you focus on. It's like, hey, this is the desire, this is like the image, the thing that I focus on is having the partner that gives me all the gifts, that gives me all these things. And if you're focused on that thing on the pedestal, you don't notice what's in the shadow, which is the intent that ends up creating the betrayal, that betrayal script, like playing out. So by idolizing those provider men and that specific lifestyle, it ended up blinding her to the, well, not only blinding her, but blinding other women that I've known that have been successful to men that did not have good or loving intent. So the way that we stop the way that we stop this from happening, and the way that we actually solve this problem, is that we have to transmute that feeling, that energy, to go from like being a hyper independent survivor to being a securely interdependent creator, which does take healing. It does take inner work. It's not just, oh, I need to manifest my ideal relationship. It requires you to like focus on yourself, to be okay with being alone, to say like, hey, if I go out for a relationship, the only thing I'm going to find out there is myself, and I am not okay. So I need to do something to like work on myself, so that when I go back out into the world, the people that I meet are healed because I've worked on healing myself. which is very difficult to say to a lot of people who have experienced breakups, or who want to manifest their exes back, or who are hurt from betrayal, because the most common response after being betrayed, even if it was a past experience, is to go out and to like to revenge fuck, to like go out and find people, to get over that person by getting under someone else, which is not the solution. So to become securely interdependent, there are a couple of really powerful processes that I've found with clients. One of them is like somatic repatterning. So instead of just saying that I think I forgive this person, or I think I'm over it and take care of it, like we need to interact directly with the body. Some form of somatic work that allows us to process those emotions and those energy and get that out of the body. So like vagus nerve toning, doing like mantra meditations help out a lot, because they vibrate those parts of the body and bring us back into a state of relaxing. We saw what is it, Ashton Hall, the dude with like the bowls of ice. Bowls of ice are another good way um, to work the vagus nerve. Also, cold plunges and cold dips. So using methods to reset the body and reset the nervous system to let us know that it is safe to exist. I am safe to exist within myself, and I can. Most important first things to do is to have some somatic repatterning, so that you let yourself know, not mentally, but physically, let your body know I am safe, to move you out of that fight or flight mode. The second thing is addressing your your childhood trauma, the mother and father wounds. I do a couple of different sessions and a couple of different techniques to allow this to happen. That's what I do in my one-to-one sessions, is I like walk people through those processes, because most of the time people think like, oh, I want my ideal relationship, I want this person, but then they don't realize that what they need to work on is the energy patterns from those traumatic relationships and those traumas from when they were children, because what's happening right now in their relationship is usually a reflection of what's happened from when they were younger. So father wound exercises work really well. The next thing that works super well is starving the egregore. You got to starve that part of the subconscious mind that feeds into those images of um, bad relationships. Like stop consuming or creating cheating content. Like stop watching Temptation Island. Get off of Netflix. Stop eating that stuff, because the egregore can only survive if you continue to reinforce the story with new images, new concepts, new stories that let you know that this is something that still exists. If you basically cut that out of your life and replace it with impactful images of healthy, loyal couples, loyal relationships of devotion, that ends up replacing that egregore with a new healthy one, with one that supports that, oh, relationships can work, love can exist, people can be in healthy, loving, committed relationships the way that I imagine a loving, healthy relationship can be. The other thing that works really well is like practicing polarity exercises to rebalance your polarity. So doing things that get you back into your feminine energy, especially if you're hyper independent. My hyper independent ladies. Esther, if you watch this girl, um, um, and all my other hyper independent, my corporate ladies, my business owners, um, my boss babes, it's so important. If you spend so much time in your life going out into the world, like trying to dominate, doing all this work and getting stuff done and securing the bag, it is so important to do rituals that engage your feminine energy, where you can go back to being receptive, not trying to change and put your energy out into the world, but reclaim that energy for yourself again. That's so freaking important to have that as a ritual that you do on a continuous basis. Um, and then outside of that, making sure that you're setting in new affirmations, which can be done with like affirmation videos that you listen when you're going to sleep, subliminal tapes, um, guided visualizations, sat scenes that make you feel safe, secure, and healed. Understanding that your goal for a relationship shouldn't just be, I want to be with this person. It shouldn't just be, I want somebody to spoil me. It should be, I feel healthy. I feel loved. I feel secure. I feel treasured and cherished. And making sure that your language is aligned with how you want to be how you want to be treated in the relationship. And this has to be like hyper specific, because one of the things that I noticed with the wizard Liz is that she used certain phrases that sound good but are actually very problematic. Like, I want to be spoiled. That's problematic. You do not want to be spoiled. When it comes to a relationship, you don't want to be spoiled. Dictionary definition, Cambridge Dictionary definition of spoil: to destroy or reduce the pleasure, interest, or beauty of something. Do you want your pleasure to be reduced? Do you want your beauty to be destroyed? So when you say that you want your partner to spoil you, understand that when you use words like that, abracadabra, as I speak, I will create. You are literally creating that experience. So she did get spoiled. So don't be surprised when you get what you ask for. So be very clear in the words that you use when you're setting affirmations. Instead of saying that I want my partner to spoil me, better terms could be, I want a partner. I am so happy and grateful that I have a partner who cherishes me, who treasures me. I have a partner who I feel as though is generous. This person rewards me. They value me. I feel loved and taken care of. Those are, and being treasured, cherished, and all these other things will usually end up meaning that you get gifts, which is that's no problem. But it's tied to words that are much more meaningful and much more specific to the outcome that you want. So be very mindful of whatever words that you use in your affirmations. Um, and with all that stuff together, that should ultimately stop you from going through an experience where you feel as though that you end up getting betrayed. Because if your body hasn't learned how to relax, it hasn't learned how to be safe, you will just continue to run from relationship to relationship where you search for drama or awfulness because that's the only place that you feel comfortable. So ultimately, before you go into your next relationship, keep a couple of things in mind. Number one, that trauma driven independence is still trauma driven. It broadcasts the frequency of people being abandoned and you being abandoned, even if it's wearing a designer suit. So it doesn't matter if you see people who are hyper independent. If it's trauma driven independence, it's not a healthy thing. And if you look at yourself and notice that your independence or your success is trauma driven, take some time and start working on it. Um, Second thing is making sure that you're mindful of the things that you educate and entertain yourself with, because that ends up becoming your altar. When you're repeatedly watching, listening, hearing, and describing different things like cheaters, like if you constantly consume that kind of content, you end up lighting candles for those spirits to find you. So make sure that the things that you are consuming and putting into your life and that you're using to entertain yourself are a reflection of the kind of life that you want and desire for yourself. Um, Third point before we break and take our time out of this is like make sure that if you're if you feel as though that you're a woman who is in this masculine energy, make sure that you have the receptive balance. Because if you're in the masculine energy without the receptive balance, you will attract partners that balance your polarity, for better or for worse. Um, so if you won't soften, the universe will send you a man that forces you to surrender through betrayal. The universe will force you to soften, to just relax. So either you learn this lesson and you do the work yourself, or the universe will force you into a position where you have to. In the last point, which is very important for my especially my most independent and successful ladies, healing is not about removing your ambition. It doesn't make you. I know that you may think that your trauma and your experiences may be the fuel behind what you're doing, but trauma fueled ambition is a problem. And unplugging, you're not getting rid of your ambition. You're just unplugging the survival charge behind it. You're removing that energy. Um, and if you do that, you get to keep your empire, but your nervous system actually gets to relax, and you could finally be calm and not fear waiting for the next shoe to drop. Yeah. So hopefully, the Wizard Liz gets help with resolving these issues, and they're able to ultimately navigate through this, because it's not, even if, depending on what ends up happening in the relationship, because they're going to have some form of connection since they're going to have this child together. Um, I really truly hope that they get the support from the community and the people around them, so that they're able to make it through this in a positive way, not only for themselves but for their child. And I ultimately wish them the best, and I wish anybody else who wants to ultimately have a healthy, loving, caring relationship and wants to release this negative pattern, these unresolved issues. Um, I pray that they learn forgiveness and are able to make it through. Because I think that it would, like, I think that their story would be a really powerful one to show people the power of forgiveness and the ability to pull through things, especially children, with children in the mix. Because the one that's going to need the most support out of all this is not Liz, it's not Landon, it's that child. Because if it's not taken care of, then that child will probably end up going through the same thing themselves. So, for you, I hope that you are able to make it through all this stuff. And if you need help with any of this, you can go check out the description for one of my other videos and book a session. I'm more than happy to help, as somebody who has been through the pain myself on all ends. Either way, talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in, guys.